All right, bruvs, we're back with the Golem Remembered, 1909 to 1980, Variations of a Jewish Legend by Arnold L. Goldsmith. We have a bunch of photos before we start the next chapter. Let's look at them quickly. It should take a minute or two. The Rabbi and the Golem. Metal sculpture by Harry Friedman of Oak Park, Michigan. Photographed by Bernard Brodsky. The Old Jewish Cemetery in Prague, courtesy of the Embassy of the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, Washington, D.C. Rabbi Judah Lowe's grave in the Old Jewish Cemetery in Prague, courtesy of the Embassy of the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, Washington, D.C. Monument to Rabbi Judah Lowe by Ladislaus Salon in front of the Town Hall in Prague, courtesy of the State Jewish Museum. Model of the Alt-Neuschel Shoal in Prague, the oldest extant European synagogue still in use, and the setting for several of the Golem legends, courtesy of Beth Herfurtsoth, the Nathan Goldman Museum of the Jewish Diaspora, Tel Aviv. The Golem illustration by George Hilovsky for the Golem by Chaim Block. Baruch Chemerinsky as Rabbi Levi in the Golem, a dramatic poem in 8 scenes performed by the Habima Theater of Moscow, courtesy of the American Jewish Historical Society. Father Thaddeus, Rabbi Levi's antagonist in the Golem, a dramatic poem in 8 scenes performed by the Habima Theater of Moscow during a tour of the United States in 1948, courtesy of the New York Public Library. Aaron Meskin as the Golem in the Golem, a dramatic poem in 8 scenes performed by Habima Theater of Moscow during a tour of the United States in 1948, courtesy of the New York Public Library. Aaron Meskin as the Golem with his broad axe in the Golem, a dramatic poem in 8 scenes performed by the Habima Theater of Moscow, etc., etc. The actor David Gans made up to play the Golem in Black Golem, courtesy Frederick Sweet, American Twist Productions. The Golem offering Pernath, a book, illustration by Hugo Steiner, Prague for Der Golem by Gustav Meyrink. The Golem walking the streets, illustration by Hugo Steiner, Prague for Der Golem. There's the first one. And the third one, Pernath making his way to the hidden room, illustration by Hugo Steiner, Prague for Der Golem by Gustav Meyrink. The Golem in the streets of the Prague ghetto, seen from Der Golem, wie in die Welt kam, courtesy Museum of Modern Art. The Golem and Emperor Rudolph soldiers, seen from Der Golem. Rabbi Lowe, the Golem, and the Jews of Prague, seen from Der Golem. I'm on page. The German child offering the Golem an apple, seen from Der Golem. Nice hairdo. Do you not remember the Galactic Golem? Superman meets the Galactic Golem. Superman is a registered trademark of blah, blah, blah. That was 5 minutes. Chapter 6, Abraham Rothberg's Sword of the Golem, the most significant work of fiction on the Golem of Prague in the last 50 years and the major American contribution to the literary treatment of the legend is a novel by Abraham Rothberg, 1922 to, he's probably died since, published in 1970. Yes, Rothberg did die. He died in 2011. Titled The Sword of the Golem, it is, according to the author, about peace and violence, about when the sword is to be used and when it is to be sheathed, if ever. Rothberg's dedication reads, "To all who have searched the past of the Golem and questioned his meaning, but most of all to the great Levick, who breathed new life into the Golem's clay." Although Rothberg has written 6 novels, of which The Sword of the Golem is his 5th, and a 4-volume eyewitness history of World War II, he is not well known. A native New Yorker, he was a roving correspondent for the National Observer and a special correspondent for the Manchester Guardian before becoming a professor of English at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York. In 1963, remembering early Hebrew legends of the Golem taught him by his father and uncle, Rothberg visited the Jewish Museum in Prague as well as the Old Cemetery, the Alt Neuschel, the grave of Rabbi Lowe, and the area of the Old Ghetto. It was on this visit, he says, that slowly the book began to jostle the corners of my mind. That Rothberg knew his subject intimately is evidence on every page of his work. Leavick's verse drama may have been his major source of inspiration, but Rothberg was also familiar with Chaim Bloch's tales and Gustav Meyrink's novel. Rothberg's ability to reanimate the clay of the Golem as if he were bringing this strange creature to life for the first time is no small accomplishment. To this story of 16th century Prague, he brings fresh insights and post-Holocaust perspectives. In a prize-winning article, What Time Is It Now, 1973, he explains how he came to write The Sword of the Golem. The more I read, the more it seemed to me that 16th century Prague and Bohemia were like our own time and place, a time of terrible transition, through from what to what no one knew or could guess, and a place of awful unease. It seemed to Rothberg that the more he learned about the period of Rabbi Lowe's life, the better he understood the present. So when the time came to write, I found myself writing not a historical novel, but in fact a truly contemporary one, a novel not of 16th century Prague, but of our own troubled 20th century. One can detect in this pacifist novel the mood of an America wary of the tragic loss of life in Vietnam, but more to the point, it reflects the hurt in the memorable statement of Golda Meir, who in 1967 told the Arab world that her country could forgive her old enemies for everything they had done, except their turning Israel's sons into killers. The analysis that follows will demonstrate how Rothberg adapted some of the old tales to his own purposes. The character of Rabbi Lowe, spelled Lowe by Rothberg, and that of the Golem take on broad new dimensions. Like Meyrink, Rothberg was fascinated by the psychological implications of the double, but unlike his German predecessor, the American novelist was content to limit himself to the world of the story being told, with no incursions into the realm of the occult, beyond the Kabbalistic lore involved in the creation of the Golem, and Rabbi Lowe's dream communications with God. Meyrink flavored ghostly apparitions, feverish nightmares, dreams within dreams, the transmigration of souls, underground journeys, East Indian mysticism, and the occult world of tarot cards and Egyptian mythology. Rothberg prefers the relatively simple world of the 16th century European ghetto. New psychological and moral dimensions. Rothberg deliberately changes the date traditionally given for Rabbi Lowe's creation of the Golem on the banks of the Moldau, moving it from 1580 to 1589, exactly 200 years after the monstrous pogrom of April 1389, an event still memorialized by Jews every Yom Kippur, with an elegy written by Avigdor Caro, The change of date, though slight, does add the weight of history to the events of the novel, and the allusion to the 14th century pogrom foreshadows the horrors described in chapters 24 and 25. For more significant than moving the date up, far more significant than moving the date up 9 years, however, is Rothberg's characterization of his Rabbi Lowe, going far beyond the relatively uncomplicated portrayal found in the tales of Rosenberg and Bloch. Rothberg follows Leivick's lead, adding new elements to deepen and enrich the character of the rabbi. These new complications are extremely important and show how later generations of readers can find fresh meanings in old legends. The first new element is the theme of doubt. In the simple purity of the earlier tales, the rabbi had no doubt that God had chosen him, the acknowledged spiritual leader of the Jewish community of Prague, and thus all of Bohemia, to protect his people against their enemies. However, in Rothberg's version, as Rabbi Lowe becomes aware of the Golem's obsession with evil and brutality, he begins to question his own motivation, his own capacity for error and sinfulness. Did I, he asks himself early in the novel, in my zeal to protect my people, misinterpret the dream the Almighty sent me? Was my own fear of Thaddeus and his accusations of blood guilt a poison that flawed this creature at birth? In my joy that we had a defender, was there also vengefulness and spite, hatred and malice? His first inclination is to assume that since God gave him the ability to create a man out of clay, he cannot be a grievous sinner in the eyes of the omnipotent. But there is always the possibility that God is punishing the Jewish community by allowing him to create not a redeemer, but a scourge. Rothberg, in another new development, uses the rabbi's wife, Pearl, to probe the whole matter of Judah's possible moral flaw. She does not like the Golem and asks her husband to get rid of him after his mission is accomplished at Passover. Apparently, Judah has informed her of Joseph's mysterious origin. Rothberg never makes this clear. Pearl complains that Rabbi Lowe acts like a general when Joseph is around. It is as if suddenly you were David, Josiah Bar Giora, a commander of armies sending soldiers to their deaths. Pearl has to admit that Judah treats the Golem like a son, but because she implicates her husband in the death of their own son, Bezalel, the paternal relationship is ominous. The reader is reminded of this relationship in chapter 16, when the Golem who has run away returns and saves the rabbi from an angry mob and then disappears. Rabbi Lowe links his son and the Golem, thinking, that imperfect creature, the creation not of his loins but of his hands, was not Bezalel. Yet the Golem was as much of a son as he would now have, a veritable Kaddish. Pearl compares her husband to Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac and warns him, do not contend with the Lord, Judah. Do not let your pride in being the Rabbi Lowe lead you astray. You are not the Messiah. You are an 81-year-old man. Let some other now be a hero, responsible for saving the ghetto. His conscience pricked by the reference to Bezalel, Judah Lowe has to ask himself, had he out of ambition and pride forced Bezalel against his nature to follow in the footsteps of the Hohi, Rabbi Lowe, and so led him to his death? Rothberg is the only author considered in this study to try to use the story of Bezalel Lowe, but his attempt is not very successful. The details are murky, only hinted at, never adequately clarified. In real life, of course, I'm going to call it Bezalel became a rabbi in Colon, and ran a rabbinical academy until his death in 1600. Judah wanted Bezalel to be appointed his successor, But the old rabbi had made enemies whose opposition thwarted his dream. Just how Judah Low's ambitions for his son caused the latter's death is never clearly explained. But Rothberg conceives the Golem as a surrogate son for the bereaved Judah, and thus Judah's role in Bezalel's death foreshadows his having to remove Joseph in the denouement of the sword of the Golem. Pearl is not the only character in Rothberg's novel who tries to warn Rabbi Lowe of the dangers of pride. Mordecai Marcus Meisel, the Jewish merchant, financier, and philanthropist who was Judah Lowe's close friend in both real life and fiction, argues strenuously with the rabbi over the best way to try to save the Jewish community. Meisel, who has access to Emperor Rudolph, wants to use some of his vast fortune to buy the Jews' safety. Judah naively insists on the opportunity to debate the Catholic Church so as to convince the ecclesiastical authorities once and for all that the Jews are innocent of the blood libel. Meisel tells his old friend Judah, "You are carried away with your obsession to be a savior." When Judah defends his sincere wish to save his co-religionists, Meisel turns him of the sin of pride that apes humility, the arrogance of one who sets himself in the forefront without remembering that those who remain behind him must pay for his affront. You are not the Messiah, nor were meant to be. It is Meisel's feeling that Rabbi Lowe does not have the same compassionate love of men that he had when the merchant brought him to the Klaus synagogue in Prague some years ago, and he attributes the change to Judah's anger when the community refused to make Bezalel your successor. That Rothberg had done his work well, carefully studying the life of Judah Lowe before embellishing the known facts with his own imaginative touches, can be seen in Judah's praise of Bezalel when he tells the financier that his son would have carried on what he had begun, Marcus. He would have stood fast against the discord and the selfishness of the ghetto, against its divisiveness, against the greed and violence of the Goyim outside. Bezalel would have insisted on teaching Bible and Talmud to build character, to preserve our traditions, instead of sending students off on the crooked paths of sterile, hair-splitting, and useless, showy disputation. Apparently, the idealistic son was crushed by the community's refusal to allow him to continue his father's crusade, and he would not be comforted by Rabbi Lowe's telling him of his own years of rejection before being invited to Prague, of his many years as an educator before being given the higher post he wanted. Meisel denies that he had the influence to keep the impatient, bitter, and immature Bezalel in Prague. In fact, the elders overruled him. Judah admits that his son was too young. That was why I wanted him to be my deputy for a while, to learn, to mature. But Meisel tries to ease his friend's guilty conscience and insists that Bezalel, even though he was an excellent teacher, was not man enough to be rabbi of Prague. You are convinced, he tells Judah, that Bezalel died of a broken heart, but I don't believe that people die of broken hearts. Of broken heads, of broken bones, yes, but not of broken hearts. Meisel pleads with Rabbi Lowe to compromise his principles and lose the public debate with the Catholic Church so that the Jews can be saved, even though many of their sacred books will then be burned. Judah sums up the crux of his dilemma, sadly mocking his own title. And now the Hoa, Rabbi Lowe, must walk low. His friend underscores his problems with the criticism, "Pride, Judah, pride. If you persist, the consequence will be blood." Meisel's prediction suggests the second new dimension Rothberg introduces to the legend, the moral debate over the Jews' use of violence in self-defense. If the Golem is seen as representing the id and the Holo, Rabbi Lowe, the superego, then the external struggle of the Jews against the Gentiles can be viewed as the moral confrontation between Jewish idealism and historical necessity. From this perspective, the moral and the psychological come together. with the Golem appearing as the rabbi's alter ego. The explicit decomposition of Lowe's character can be seen, for example, when Rothberg describes the worried rabbi walking the ghetto streets a week before Passover as if he were himself the Golem. Usually the identification is more subtle. From the opening pages of the novel, Rabbi Lowe struggles with the dilemma in creating the Golem. Is not he who cuts down with the sword an even greater victim? He who lifts up the sword is worse by far, for he loses his share of the world to come. But he lives, his heart cried, and he who is cut down is dead. And instructing the clay, even as he shapes it, the rabbi emphasizes that the Golem is to be one who works the Lord's will. He is Israel's defender, a Gideon, a Saul, a David, the Lord's anointed for his holy task. When the Golem replies to kill, the rabbi corrects him to save. Rothberg also dramatizes Rabbi Lowe's internal dilemma by splitting his character into two opposing forces, represented by his disciples, Isaac and Jacob. Isaac Hayat, his scholarly son-in-law, represents the traditional Jewish abhorrence of violence and the unswerving belief that God will protect the Jews. Jacob Nissan is a fiery radical who argues that Jews must learn to protect themselves. This is the argument that led to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of World War II and to the formation of the Jewish Defense League after the war. Jacob believes that Jews should die like men, not like cattle. We must not become victims. We have been victims long enough. Too long, Rabbi Lowe sides with Isaac, quoting the Talmud in support of pacifism. Whoever raises his hand against his neighbor, even if he does not strike him, is an evildoer. When Jacob asks what one is to do when his neighbor raises a threatening hand first, Rabbi Lowe stubbornly insists that Jews do not exalt the sword or the fist. We need not die like cattle, but we must not live like beasts. We can live like men. When Jacob cries out against the futility of such idealism, the rabbi confidently points to the Golem as the new weapon that God is sent to protect us. This last statement is the heart of the matter to him. Though the Golem represents force, he is sent as a redeemer by God, and thus whatever violence he is responsible for is sanctified. The first instance of the Golem's awesome power and cruelty is presented in a minor key. Having overheard the plan of a group of students to burn the Alt Nushel, he waits for them at night, knocks the heads of two of his victims together, and uses their bodies to put out the flames. The second incident follows shortly thereafter. To foil a plot to desecrate the Jewish cemetery, the Golem puts on a white sheet and ancient battle helmet, terrifying the plotters. The comedy of the scene is abruptly terminated when he uses his axe to chop off the finger of one student, braver than the rest. Isaac, assigned as the Golem's private tutor, complains to his father-in-law about his pupil's fascination with hatred and evil, violence and force. The worried Isaac argues that men should not be all Yetzer and all evil impulse. The rabbi defends the Golem as a novice at evil, a child, but Isaac sharply disagrees. Rabbi, he is not a newborn. He has learned many things that I did not teach him. Everywhere he seeks out murder, war, brutality. With these brushstrokes deepening and darkening the portrait of his characters, Rothberg also sharpens the suspense. Isaac wants Rabbi Lowe to send the Golem back, ominously predicting that the Golem will bring disaster on us all. But Jacob calls for all able-bodied Jews to fight the Philistines. He does not want the resident of the ghetto to rely only on this new David to fight Goliath. When, in a third incident, the Golem catches a Christian butcher in the act of hiding the dead Gentile child wrapped in a prayer shawl in Mordecai Miesel's cellar as part of the blood libel, the defender of the Jews not only beats up the man, but tears his arm from its socket in the process before delivering him to the bailiffs. Rabbi Lowe blessed him for having saved the ghetto, but still the rabbi's heart was not set at rest. A third major change that Abraham Rothberg has made in his treatment of the legend of the Golem of Prague is a remarkable transformation in the Golem himself. Again, Rothberg's debt is to Liebig rather than to Rosenberg or Bloch. However, one is also strongly reminded of Mary Shelley's monster who begs his creator, Victor Frankenstein, for love and understanding, but is denied the compassion he craves. As Donald Glut has pointed out in his fascinating study, The Frankenstein Legend, a tribute to Mary Shelley and Boris Karloff, 1973, the young scientist never accepted the fact that beneath the shriveled, yellowed flesh of his creation lay an emotional being that cried to give as well as receive love. It was for this rejection that the being eventually became a monster, bent upon murderous revenge. Rothberg's Golem is more complicated, but the kinship is striking. From the beginning, Rothberg's Golem, like Liebig's, objects to being born. The very earth resisted his creation and lay limp and diffuse, refusing to be formed out of the chaos into that which was human. The recalcitrant clay repeatedly strives to be reabsorbed into the Moldau riverbank, and anguish in the clay pulsed to Rabbi Lowe's fingers. Speaking without speech, do not rip me from this womb of clay. Rabbi Lowe consents to clay's silent plea. Did I request you to be my maker? Did I enjoin you to tear me from the bowels of the earth? Leave me embedded in the unfeeling clay in the silent, peaceful dark. The Golem even threatens the rabbi. If you bring me to life, my rage shall devour the living. My strength shall lay waste the earth. When Rabbi Lowe explains that neither of them can resist his destiny, the gray corpse laments his fate, which is to be a clenched fist, a hulk, a golem. A golem, yes, the rabbi answers, but one who works the Lord's will. That Joseph Golem can be a naysayer as well as a yay-sayer is seen not only in his objection to being born, but also in his rejection of the yellow hat and armband the Jews are forced to wear in the ghetto. This Golem is neither a dumb Tellurian force nor just a composer designed to interpret divine codes. He asks to be taught how to put on phylacteries, which the rabbi explains were meant to connect the arm, heart, and head in the performance of good deeds. He also asks the rabbi to teach him to read and pray. Whereas Rosenberg and Bloch denied the Golem any sexual urges, Rothberg again turns to Liebig and goes far beyond his model. Almost immediately, Joseph shows interest in Rabbi Lowe's serving girl and ward, Kath, or is that Kathy? Kath Hosh. The rabbi is uneasy about this development, but he reassures himself that a Golem lived only to fulfill the will of his creator, an incomplete creation deprived of the light of God within him. A Golem was supposed to have neither wisdom nor judgment, nor was he endowed with a will of his own or sexual feelings. Yet, the Golem's glances at Kate left no doubt that powerful emotions surged within his frame. Joseph's growing interest in sex, combined with his potential for violence and cruelty, does not ease the rabbi's mind. When Rabbi Lowe suspects that the Passover matzah has been poisoned, he commands the Golem to taste one, but Joseph at first refuses, afraid to die. His creator has to remind him of his mission to save the Jews, even if it means his own destruction. Only when the rabbi assures him that he will not die at this time does Joseph reluctantly bite a matzo and fall to the ground in convulsions. Using his special healing powers, Rabbi Lowe puts the Golem to sleep and removes the pain. Observing him closely, he wonders if this strange creature has changed recently. There seemed to be a finer grain in the coarseness of his features, some sensitivity that had not been there before. Had Joseph become less Golem and more human, or was it that he was now more familiar, so that his strangeness had been lessened by time and usage? When he awakens, the Golem tells the rabbi, I have felt like a man, for I remember the pain you have taught me suffering. And that will end this portion of the chapter. which goes on for quite a while and will be broken up into 3 parts. That's all for now. Goodbye, Rob. Goodbye. That's my chair. Trust me, it's my chair.